Okay, well, thank you, everyone. Whereas the previous papers have indicated rigorous research and have given you all sorts of parallels, this one will be a little bit different, partly because finding parallels has been rather problematic. So we've gone with a rather cheeky title of Touch Wood, but that will become evident as we progress. So the combination of Rob Sands and myself is that Rob brings the wood expertise and I bring a modicum of penis expertise, apparently, to our dynamic duo. But actually, I have to say that it's been a very fruitful collaboration, and the different observations that we're able to bring to the object have been very interesting and stimulated some very interesting discussion. So here is the object in question. It is a phallus carved from wood, specifically carved from ash. And it's a young round of ash of about 10 years old. Rob Sands thinks that this will be a branch, a primary branch, and you can see on the base there in the upper right-hand corner that you can count about 10 annular rings, so about 10 years of growth. And the overall length is about 160 millimeters in length, and you get about 46 mils in maximum width at that, what we would call the, if you will, the cylindrical base of the object. So I'll discuss this a little bit more, but let's talk about the material itself first. So ash is a very common native tree to the British Isles. It's a wood, a tree that could have grown quite close to the site of Vindolanda. So it could be locally acquired wood, though of course we can't prove that it's wood imported from further afield. So at this point, we can't demonstrate either of that, but just to say there's nothing particularly exceptional about the choice of material itself, except that ash can often be, quite a hard wood with quite good density and can take a lot of pressure, for example, making cricket bats and such out of it. The other interesting factor about the object is you can look quite closely. And what is quite nice is if the way that ash particularly forms, you have very large cells that start with the new annual growth. So that's depicted here in this lower left-hand image, with those larger cells for absorbing nutrients and water and transporting them, kind of depicted in the large white blobs. And those are responsible for the tree rings, that early growth in the annual process. And as the year progresses, those cell structures become much smaller. And so you get that variation. So the fact that we can see that tree ring growth is very helpful. It also helps in terms of indicating where. There are also tool marks. So you can see here artifacts of the blade that carved the object itself, which appears to be a knife, likely. There are kind of minor nicks in the blade that will be a particular signature of that blade at the given time of carving. The object itself is quite simply carved. It's not necessarily the work of a master carver, but it is someone with some skill. I'm not sure I'd go so far as expertise, but someone who's used to carving in wood. It's deftly done. There's not lots of problems or gouging or anything of that sort. It's someone who would be used to carving objects in wood. We will get onto function in a moment, but one of the things I would like to say, sorry, I forgot it earlier here, is the context of the object. So this was found in a ditch fill dating to the Antonine period, or rather the end of the Antonine period, or the end of the Antonine period fort at Vindolanda. We're still in the middle of doing contextual analysis because, as you can imagine, Vindolanda's ditches are full of riches. But at present, there doesn't appear to be anything which would indicate that this is an exceptional or structured deposit ditch fill. It appears to be part of that normal, well, we'll say normal for Vindolanda, that process of infilling ditches at the end of a phase to infill and level up the ground in advance of building a new fort or structures in the next phase. So in terms of deposition, we would argue then that this is going into the ground in the later 2nd century. So as I say, it's the end of the Antonine phase in advance of the Severan fortlet that occurs on site. So in terms of that context, it gives us actually quite nice dating, but no other special insights to kind of function or interpretation. So I will now get to the function bit. And this is where it gets interesting and far more speculative, if I'm honest. So as far as we're aware, and please someone here do correct me if you know of other examples, this is the only wood-carved phallus we have from Roman Britain. Looking more widely at the ancient world in general, opening that up to Europe, the Near East, and North Africa, and expanding our chronological parameters, there's not a lot of examples of just disembodied ithiphallic carvings. There's usually some sort of other context in the sense that it's a pendant or an example from the Near East in the Levant, southern Levant, is a pestle in a number of other pestles that may be phallic in form. There is this fantastic example of a wooden one from about 1550 BC to about 1000 BC from the New Kingdom in Thebes in Egypt. And an interesting example of, we don't have the phallus itself, but this wooden Priapus statuette found in a shipwreck outside of Marseille. It's hard to see in this photo, but if you can take my word, the black dark zone here is actually a hole, a socket, to take a separate phallus to insert into the statue of Priapus. So without a lack of any kind of clear comparatives, we're questioning what the function of this is. And really, a lot of that is coming down to wear patterns. So there is very clear differential wear on the object. And while we've tried to capture this photographically, some of it is easier to spot with the naked eye when you can observe the artifact directly. I'll try my best to indicate that, but please take my word on it. So the first thing to indicate is that the greatest amount of wear occurs on the cylindrical base, and particularly on this convex base. And you can see here that it is quite a smooth, rather even wear pattern, where there is differential wear or patterning, actually this bit here, for example, that's more to do with the material of the wood and degradation of the wood itself than necessarily any sort of damage or wear marks from use. The other thing to point out is that the ridges at the end of each cylinder, while defined, are not particularly sharp. They're actually very worn. And so the combination of this very rounded, well-worn base, suggesting that that is seeing regular use or contact, and the worn ridges of the cylindrical base suggest that it's not simply an object, a phallus, being socketed into something. It doesn't seem likely that that would produce this very worn convex base. The other area where you have greater wear is at the glands and upper bit of the shaft, up to kind of varying where you are in the shaft from about 40 to 60 mils from the tip inward. And partly you can see that by the differential preservation of the ring, the annual rings in the wood, such that they're preserved most here. You can also see, in most cases, clear evidence of tooling and carving from about, basically from the base of the shaft toward the upper shaft. And from another angle, one of the sides has slightly more wear, as if that, if you were looking at it top down, as it were, the right side of the phallus tip is slightly more worn and grooved in visually distinct. So the question here is, what sort of object has greater wear at both ends and not in the middle? I'm afraid our list for that sort of object is quite short at the moment, but again, I'm welcome to any suggestions and comments. I'm highly aware of the expertise of our audience. And there are two parallels that we can think of. So one would be a wooden pestle. So I have here a contemporary modern example of a wooden pestle of someone who's using that pestle to grind up herbs and with olive oil and other seasonings for cooking. You can see, partly because it's not being oiled regularly, there is differential wear. So this is the upper bit of the handle where the person is holding it. and this is the lower end. But what's notable here is that this lower end was originally rounded, like the upper end, but it has, over time, worn flat. And partly because of the interaction with olive oil as well, it's retained that sort of oiled sheen of a surface. So you can see there that where it both ends, which is intriguing. The other example, and I don't think we can rule out the fact that this might be a Roman dildo. When you search museum catalogs, surprisingly, there's not a lot of dildos that come up. So the best example I could find in organic material was this 18th century example carved in ivory, thought to be French, that is in the Science Museum collection in London. And here what I would point out is that, again, you're getting greater wear at the glans and upper bit of the shaft, such that you can see that relative to, in terms of coloration, but also the grain of the ivory itself. There was no excellent picture of the far end as well, but actually there's a cap at this far end, actually with a plunger, so that it would, you can use the plunger to create a stream of liquid. But actually there's much more wear of that far shaft as well that can be seen in the imagery. And so at the moment, that's where we are in thinking. We're trying to deduce possible functionality based on wear patterns. The choice of material of ash in and of itself doesn't necessarily indicate anything, just that it's commonly available, but also perhaps interestingly, hard wearing, which would be suitable for something like a pestle. But as you can understand, I hope, finding comparative examples to look at wear patterns, particularly in organic materials, is somewhat difficult. And with that very, very brief overview, I will leave it there because I anticipate there might be a number of questions and also, I'm hoping, suggestions and possibilities.